Hello everyone, this is my presentation about cardiac structure and function for our cardiology course. So first we're going to talk about where blood cells come from, how long they circulate, and where they go once they're used up and not functional anymore. So blood cells are produced in the medullary cavity, in long bones, and then into circulation. It's super important to realize that bones are this very blood-rich, nutrient-rich substance. Oftentimes we think about them as this kind of like dry, dead framework, but it's really important to realize that blood starts out here and eventually makes its way into circulation. So we form most of our blood cells in the long bones. They're put into circulation where they circulate for about 120 days. And then after that 120 days, the liver and other digestive accessory organs digest those cells, where they are either excreted, what can't be reused, or the parts that can be reused and formed into new blood cells are recycled and go back into your long bones and are reused, put back into circulation, and on average that blood cell holds for about 120 days. And so then in circulation, we have two main circuits. We have this circuit in your body, in your extremities, in your abdomen, etc., that comes from the heart, that is oxygenated. Your cells use that oxygen and return the deoxygenated, used up blood to your heart, where they go through the pulmonary circuit as the second circuit in here. The pulmonary circuit puts the blood through the lungs, where it's oxygenated, and then back into the heart for reuse, where the heart spits it out again for use in the rest of our body by our other organs. And so then the heart specifically is made up of 4 chambers, 2 atria, 2 ventricles. And so we think about this system as a whole system. We can think about starting after that 120-day circulation. That's going to be within our body, flowing around, doing the things that it needs to do. It's going to return to the heart from the inferior and superior vena cava into the right atrium, through the tricuspid threefold valve into the right ventricle, where it's going to be pushed through the pulmonic valve through the pulmonary artery to each lung. The super important thing to realize about the pulmonary artery is that it is an artery, but its blood is deoxygenated. And so it's going to go through that pulmonary circuit where it's reoxygenated, and it's going to return through the pulmonary veins. And just like the pulmonary artery, the pulmonary veins are veins, but they carry oxygenated blood. And that's going to be opposite of the arteries and veins that we're going to see in the rest of our body. So those pulmonary veins are going to return to the left atrium through the bicuspid twofold valve into the left ventricle, where it's pumped through the aortic valve, through the aorta, and back into that systemic circuit for those 120 days where they're used. They carry oxygen and other nutrients around for our cells to use. So then that is the flow of blood. And so the center of this flow is the pump that our heart is. So this heart pumps by electrical stimulation. And so it's very reliable because the heart creates its own electrical impulse. It doesn't have to rely on any outside impulse to create an electrical flow. And then for its regulation based on outside stimuli, it uses the autonomic nervous systems to stabilize the beating to make the mechanical flow and movement most efficient. So we have the heart making its own electrical impulse so that it's incredibly reliable. And then we have the outside stimuli coming through the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, and make the heart most effective for what it needs at that time. So the sympathetic nervous system will increase the heart's own signal and is usually due to a stress response. The parasympathetic nervous system will decrease those signals for relaxation and maintenance, where the heart can kind of rest. And so then this heart's beating constantly. It has that super reliable mechanism. And the thing we have to realize is that just because the heart is beating does not mean there's any actual fluid moving, which is the point of it beating. And so the actual mechanical movement is dependent on a few other factors. And so we can think about a water pump, which is probably more familiar to most of us. And we have to realize that just because the pump is turning, that doesn't mean any water is going to come out, right? Just because our heart is beating, that does not ensure that any fluid is actually coming out or an adequate amount of fluid is coming out, right? We have to think about if there's adequate volume being brought in, and there's no blockages in supply or downstream. And then we also have to think about speed, right? If a pump turns too fast, that pump will not fill up and won't actually be able to pump anything out because it's kind of chronically contracted. And so the key takeaway there is just knowing that because the heart is beating, it's electrically beating, it doesn't ensure there's any actual mechanical movement in that process.